Hello, dear friends. I'm recording from the Tel Aviv International Synagogue, Beit El, and here in Tel Aviv. And tonight, I'd like to talk about something I spoke about on Sukkot, referring to the Sukkot holiday, and and a Mishnah connected to the Sukkot holiday, which I find of interest. So I will open it up. It's taken from the Mishnah of Sukkah, chapter 3, and it is Mishnah 12. And the Mishnah says, Barishona, in the beginning, Haya lulav nital b'mikdash shiva, which means originally the lulav was carried, the lulav and etrog. Today we carry the lulav and etrog all the days of Sukkot, which is 7 days in Israel and 8 days outside of Israel. And it says originally this was done specifically in the temple. Uva medina yom echad, and outside the temple, it was only carried on the first day of the holiday of Sukkot. Why the first day? Because in the Torah it says, "Ulekachtem lachem bayom harishon pri sadar." You shall take for yourselves on the first day the pri sadar, which refers to the etrog. So, in other words, the Torah specifically says to carry it for one day, carry it around in the synagogue and to wave it, etc., like we do one day. But in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple, it was carried for 7 days. And the Mishnah continues, Mishacharav Beit HaMikdash, when the temple was destroyed, in this case the second temple, Hitkin Rabban Yohanan Ben Zakai, Rabbi Yohanan Ben Zakai, the one who built the academy in Yavne after the destruction of the second temple. So he made a ruling, Sheyehelu Lav Nital B'Medina Shiva. He said that even outside of the temple, people should carry around their arba minim, their lulav, and their etrog, all 7 days of Sukkot, zecher lamikdash, in order to remember the temple, zecher lamikdash. And a second takana that he made. Now, actually, he made a lot of enactments, but these two are singled out here. So the first one was to carry the lulav and etrog even outside the temple or outside Jerusalem for all 7 days in the synagogue, wherever a person might be. And the second thing is Shia Yom Hanef Kulo Asur. Yom Hanef is the day of the barley offering in the temple. Why is it called Hanef? Because from the word Hanafa, you pick up the barley offering and then it's brought in the temple on the second day of Passover. And then the Chadash, the new crop of grain, can be eaten from that time. And normally the new crop of grain was eaten from the time of the barley offering in the temple, whenever it happened. If it happened at such and such hour, then right after the barley offering, people could eat the grain of the new year, of the new crop. However, after the destruction of the temple, Rabbi Yohanan Ben Zakai said, no, the whole day of the 16th, meaning the second day of Pesach, you should not eat from the new crop yet, but you should wait till the next day. And again, to remind you, Zecher LaMikdash. So what does this mean, Zecher LaMikdash? To remember the temple. Now, the interesting thing is the Talmud in Sukkah brings another version of this, that he didn't say Zecher LaMikdash in memory of the temple, but he said, Mehera Yibaneh Beit HaMikdash, that soon the temple will be rebuilt. And therefore, if we only carried outside the temple one day, when the temple would be built, we wouldn't remember that we ever carried it for 7 days. But if outside the temple, we carry it for 7 days, then it'll be easy for us to realize in the temple we also carry it for 7 days. So that's why Rabbi Yohanan Ben Zakai said that on the Sukkot festival, you carry the lulav and etrog all 7 days, because soon the Beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt. And people have to be ready for that. Now, this is actually quite fascinating. Soon the Beit HaMikdash would be rebuilt. Now, as I mentioned before, Yohanan Ben Zakai is living after the destruction of the temple, but he's living exactly after the destruction of the temple. If you know the story is told in the Talmud in Gittin. And in Gittin, the story is told that Rabbi Yohanan Ben Zakai saw that the Romans made a siege around Jerusalem. At the time of the siege, there was an argument in the city to fight, not to fight against the Romans. Is there even any point? And there was a group called the Biryonim, let's call it the militants, led by Abba Sikra. And these militants said, you know what? We're going to fight the Romans at any cost. In order to force the people to fight, they burnt the grain in the city, they burnt the wood for fuel, and which meant that if people don't fight, they're just going to die from starvation and from lack of fuel because it'll be cold in the winter. So Rabbi Yohanan Ben Zakai, looking around, he said to himself, this is not good. There has to be a plan B. What if we lose to the Romans? And he has a private meeting with Abba Sikra, the head of the militants, who happened to be his nephew. And he says to him, you know, I'm afraid that if Jerusalem falls, there's no plan B. I'm slightly paraphrasing. He says, I would like to plan something, meet with the Romans, just in case Jerusalem falls. Abba Sikra says, what am I supposed to tell you? Do what you think is right. He says, well, I can't go out because the militants are blocking all the gates to Jerusalem. They won't let any Jew out of the city. How am I going to talk to them? He says, I'll tell you what to do. He says, tell your students that you're unwell. Then a few weeks later, let them announce that you died. And as you know, according to Jewish law, you cannot bury anybody inside the walls of Jerusalem. They'll have to take you out of the walls of Jerusalem and then do what you think you have to do. So this is what he does. He tells two of his students that he says, tell everybody I'm unwell, which they do. And 2 weeks later, he says to them, tell them now that I passed away and you'll remove me in a coffin outside the city. So they put him into a coffin and they start walking towards the city gates. And they come to the city gates. And then at the city gates, there are militants standing there. I said, what's this? I said, what do you mean? Didn't you hear? This is the body, the remains of the famous Rabbi Yohanan Ben Zakai. I said, really? Okay. Do you mind if we put a sword into it just to make sure he's not alive? He said, what are you talking about? This is the body of the famous rabbi. You're going to pierce it with a sword? Are you crazy? Okay, we won't pierce it. They said, let us just shake it a little bit. He says, really, you're going to shake the corpse of Rabbi Yohanan Ben Zakai? Come on, give me a break. We're going to bury him and that's it. They said, okay, just go. So they left the city with Rabbi Yohanan Ben Zakai inside the box. And as they're walking out, he gets out of the box and he starts walking towards the Roman camp, which is basically right outside the city. Comes to the camp, he says, my name is Rabbi Yohanan Ben Zakai. I have a message for the general. That was of course, Vespasian. So he gets a meeting with Vespasian. Vespasian says, well, what do you want? He says, first, I want to greet you, O great Caesar. Vespasian says, wait a second. You know, what you just did was against our laws. You cannot call me Caesar because I am not. And that's worth the death penalty in our laws. So you're really starting off on the wrong leg. Yohanan Ben Zakai says, well, you must be the Caesar because in our tradition, Jerusalem will only fall to the mightiest. And who is mightier than Caesar? As he's talking, a messenger comes from Rome and he's riding in or running in. And he says, General Vespasian, I have news for you. The Caesar died, and the Senate in Rome has just appointed you as the new Caesar. Vespasian is quite surprised. How does this rabbi know what's going on before I get the indication and the message? So he turns to him and says, I'm in a good mood. Whatever you wanted, I'm willing to grant it. So Yohanan Ben Zakai says, three things I want to ask you. He says, okay, what are they? First one is, I want an academy in Yavne, a Torah academy to bring all the Torah scholars to continue our traditions. Says, okay, you can have the academy in Yavne for the Torah scholars, not a problem. Religious rights, I'm for that, no problem. What's the next one? The next one is, I want the family of Rabbi Gamliel, who was the president of the High Court, and I also want, so I would like him also. Says, not a problem. Says also, I want the family of Rabbi Tzadok and also a physician for him. And because Rabbi Sadok was the high priest, I want to have somebody from the high priesthood too. He says, okay, not a problem. So all three things he gets. While this story is being told in the Talmud in Gittin, so Rabbi Akiva, who is one of the ones telling the story, he says, he quotes the verse, Meshiv chachamim achor v'da'atam yisakel. Sometimes even the greatest of scholars are like ignoramuses, and their minds fail them. Meaning, why didn't he ask for Jerusalem? If Vespasian was in such a good mood, he could have asked for Jerusalem. Well, we don't really know the exact scenario of what happened, but I assume that whatever happened, Yohanan Ben Zakai realized that that was out of the question. They had a siege for like 3 years. The Romans were tired. They wanted the battle to be over. And I'm sure that that was really out of the question. And this is what happened. Now, the question is, though, what happened after that? Just to think that Rabbi Yohanan Ben Zakai didn't think of that. The Talmud in Brachot, in chapter 4, tells a very interesting story. When Rabbi Yohanan Ben Zakai was towards the end of his life as an elderly person, his students came and said, Rabbi, teach us something about life that we can do in order to have a place in the world to come. Rabbi Yochanan said, not a problem. I bless you and I wish that the way you fear human beings will be the way that you fear God. So he said, that's it? Yochanan said, don't say that's it. That's a very difficult thing. Because when somebody steals something, when a robber steals something at night, they say, I don't want people to see me. But they don't think about God. So if you can fear God the way you fear people, that's pretty good. That's already a very high level. And then they saw that he was starting to lose his grasp on life. And he started to cry. And the students looked at him and said, why are you crying, great rabbi? I said, why am I crying? Because soon my life will be over. I'm going to be standing in front of the King of Kings, who I cannot bribe him. I cannot lie to him. He knows everything that happened in my life. And you don't think I should cry? And besides, there are two paths before me. One of them is to the Garden of Eden in the afterlife, and one of them is to Gehinnom, to hell, to the punishment, and I don't know which way I'm going. That's a reason to cry. Now, Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook once said about this, can it be that the famous Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakai, the head of the academy in Yavne, who saved the scholars after the Second Temple period, who enacted so many enactments in that academy, that he doesn't know where he's going? If he doesn't know where he's going, how can we know where we're going? Tzvi Yehuda said what he meant was that his whole life, it aided him. What would have happened if I would have asked for Jerusalem? Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I didn't ask for enough. Maybe I should have at least tried. It bothered him his whole life to such a degree that at the end of his life, he says, I don't know which way I'm going. I don't know if I'm going to Gan Eden or to Gehinnom, to heaven or to hell. I don't know. The story continues that Yochanan Ben Zakai says to the students, I feel it coming, remove all the vessels from the room so they don't become impure, because a dead body makes vessels impure. And set up a royal throne, set up a royal chair for Hezekiah, the king of Judah. Meaning he saw a vision that the Hezekiah, Chizkiah, the king of Judah, one of the last kings and a righteous king, who saved Jerusalem, was coming to see him. What is the meaning of that? If Hezekiah, who saved Jerusalem from Sancheriv by praying to God, comes to see him, that means that obviously whatever he did was all that could be done, and there's nothing to be blamed. But this same Rabbi Yohanan Ben Zakai, what does it mean? He makes two enactments, and he makes enactments literally maybe weeks after the destruction of the temple, maybe months, but really right next to the destruction of the temple. And he says, I need to make these enactments of taking the lulav and the etrog in the synagogue all 7 days of Sukkot, because soon the temple will be built. Soon? How does he know how long it's going to be under the Romans? They weren't that friendly. I mean, we know in retrospect it was 2,000 years. How can he say soon? I'll tell you why. Rabbi Yohanan Ben Zakai realizes when there is destruction, when things are bad, when it looks like everything is falling apart, that's when people have to get up and get ready to build. Because the next day somebody has to build. Because we don't give in to destruction. We don't give in to despair. We don't give in to depression. We don't give in to losing. The next day, because you never know when the temple will be rebuilt, we have to prepare. And he builds the center in Yavne. And he thinks of having the heads of the Sanhedrin, the family of Rabbi Gamliel. And we're going to need also the high priest and his family, and people know what they're doing. And we're going to reestablish the Jewish people in their land, even if it's under the Romans in the meantime. This is what you do. You need somebody who's come to the vision. How do you rebuild? It's not that he was pacifist, like people say. That's not why he went to the Romans. He was preparing for the day after to rebuild. That's a message of hope. And when you have that optimism, that desire for rebuild, in the end, you will see it. And to quote the story of Napoleon, famous story that Napoleon Bonaparte was walking in the streets of Paris in August on the Hebrew date of the 9th of Av, the destruction of our temples. And he's walking in the streets and he walks by a synagogue with one of his generals and he hears people crying. He says, please go in, find out what's going on there. General goes in, comes out, he says, he said, do you find out why they're crying? He says, yeah, they told me their large synagogue was destroyed. He didn't know, temple, synagogue. Their large synagogue was destroyed. Napoleon says, their large synagogue was destroyed? How come I didn't know about it? How come nobody told me? If somebody did it, there's justice here in France. We know what to do. Ask them who did it. General goes back in, comes out. He says, they told me they're referring to the great synagogue in Jerusalem, and the Romans destroyed it 1,800 years ago. Napoleon says, a people that can cry for their temple, for their great synagogue, for 1,800 years, is surely going to see it rebuilt. It's people like Yohanan Ben Zakai who know that building has to happen, and when you rebuild and you have a plan, then the people rise up again and fill their place in history again. Shalom, shalom.